I did not. All right, and the caller, if you hit *6, I believe on your phone, you can unmute yourself.
This is Derek. This is Derek Munson from Windham.
Oh,
Planning Board.
thank you. Thank you so much, Derek. We'll rename you.
Yeah, sorry about not letting you into the meeting last night, Sylvia. We didn't have a Zoom login or anything like that, so sorry about that.
It's all right, but you're teetering on not being on my Christmas card list from that, but you can regain your station. I'm
I'll
only
do what I
kidding.
can. I'll do what I
It's
can.
it's fine. It's fine. And I thought I saw. Yes. We didn't see you. So we need your introduction.
William Rose, DOT.
William Rose.
Jonathan Golden.
All right, and Jonathan Golden also in here. So we are so excited about our. Take it away, Colleen.
All right, so first we have action on minutes from July 15th. Anyone have any comments? Changes in the minutes? Right, all in favor of the minutes?
Colleen, just before that, I wonder if you want the people, the quorum in the room to vote to allow the members online to be able to vote.
Oh, do we need to do that? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so before we do that, then,
So moved.
so moved. The second on allowing those people online to vote, thank you. All in favor of allowing those online to vote, participate?
So time out. If you're going to allow the room out, it has to be a roll call vote every time. So roll call vote every time.
Okay. I'm okay with that. Does anyone have any concerns with?
There's actually no voting aside from the minutes today.
Okay.
So I suppose we don't need to spend a lot. Do you want to complete that or?
Yes, so we're gonna complete that motion and all those in favor of allowing participation?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Adam, did you get all that?
I did, but I didn't get who voted on the minutes previously.
We haven't done that yet. We
Okay.
paused it.
That one. So now, now we're allowing our to vote as well. We'll go ahead with the action on the minutes. I had the motion from Andrew and from George. So all those in favor of approval of minutes?
Again, by roll call.
By roll call of the folks on,
No.
so everybody in the room has to.
Everybody, room and room.
All right, why don't we go?
Oops.
Christian Clark, Nancy Michaels, Colleen Mayu, aye.
Munson and I.
Sylvia Von Allock, aye. And now we'll go to those online. Tim White,
Yes.
Jillian Harris,
Yes.
and I'm wondering, is that it for those online for actual members? I think so. Derek, oh, Derek Munson, yep. Derek, you're voting on the
Yeah.
minute.
Well,
Okay,
I'm not sure I should vote. This is my first meeting. I just wanted to kind of get the lay of the land, so I guess I would abstain.
okay, and abstain, no problem at all.
Is there anyone else? And Adam, did you get all that, just one abstention?
Yep. Was it Andrew and George who made the motion, seconded?
Yep.
Thank you.
So we have a 10-year plan update.
Let me get that here for you.
No, it's already open.
Okay, so we just to do a share screen.
Probably go right into full screen mode with
Can everyone see that zooming in?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Swing it this way, so it just feels weird to have my back to everybody all the time.
yeah, however you want to do it.
And William, the microphone is the little black dot thing right there, and so speaking towards it is always a good idea.
The little black dot thing.
Right?
Right here? This one here. Oh,
And you may just want to do a sound check for the Zoom people so that they.
sure. Can everybody in Zoom land hear me?
Yes.
All right, so again, for those that don't know me or don't recognize me, because we haven't seen each other in quite a while, I'm William Rose, Policy and Planning Manager at the DOT's Community Assistance. And Nate had asked me to come this morning to give a high-level overview of the high-level overview we provided to Gasset last month. If you don't remember, because I'm sure Nate has been very detailed in his explanations of the 10-year plan process, we are at the early stages of our 10-year plan development effort. It's a little delayed this time out from where we typically see things. And the reason for that is to where we've been being as patient and delaying things as much as we possibly can in order to get a better understanding of federal infrastructure funding options. Currently being that we have the bill that passed the Senate and we're waiting to see what happens at the House. But all in all, we're hoping for more money. So what we're seeing here is kind of a truncated version of the presentation that Pete Stamnus, the department's Director of Project Development, provided to Gasset last month. We started things off with just kind of a high-level discussion of some of the issues to be aware of. Again, as I mentioned, we have reauthorization going on. The FAST Act, the Fixing America Surface Transportation Act, which is the current federal funding authorization, is expiring next month. And right now, 21 to 30 New Hampshire 10-year plan uses $183 million as a basis for what we anticipate for federal funds under that act. And with both the House and Senate infrastructure bills, we are looking at significantly more money. Now, obviously, the House is higher, 50% more, but we have kind of hitched our wagon to what's being discussed in the Senate, and we're 22% in additional funding there. And the other thing that you've probably heard a little bit about, and Nate, I don't know more detail on this, I'm sure you've been involved in conversations with the legislative delegation. There is talk of bringing earmarks back as an opportunity to fund some of these projects. Do you want to say?
Yeah, there were a number of quote unquote earmarks, or as they would refer to them, member designated projects in the Invest Act, including some supplemental funding for the Route 3 widening project in the town of Bedford. Unfortunately, it looks like the Invest Act probably isn't going anywhere at this point. It looks like the Senate negotiated bill is ultimately going to be the one that passes. There are no earmarks, quote unquote, in the Senate bill. It's unlikely that they will be added, almost certain won't be added when it makes its way to the House, which it's in the House right now, awaiting action. So there may be some earmarks that go through the normal, what they call the appropriations process, the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development appropriations process. There may be some member designated projects that survive in the appropriations process, but at this point, it doesn't look like there's going to be a big windfall of member designated as a result of the negotiated Senate infrastructure bill, which I was a betting person, that would be the bill that ultimately probably makes it to the finish line. And there isn't anything that I'm aware of for earmarks or member designated projects in that particular bill. William, is that consistent with what your understanding is at this point?
So far.
Okay.
Any questions so far? So far, so good. So again, a lot of the uncertainty that we're dealing with, how much money we're going to have. It's hard to plan a budget and provide a solid 10-year plan without having a solid understanding of what revenue we have to back up the projects, the slate of projects we put forward. So I think a lot of this slide is a little bit out of date because we now have a legislation that has passed. There are discretionary program funding and some limited dollars for Amtrak in there for transit. And then again, you're going to see this in a lot of the slides, but a lot of the conversation that we're having is under any significant earmarks, if there's increased discretionary money available to us, or is we're talking somewhere between 22 and 50% in additional federal dollars in the program. The department's plan with the 2023 to 2032 10-year plan is to existing projects as a priority to accelerate where we have the opportunity to. So to bring some of the projects that are in the outer years of the 10-year plan forward with the additional available dollars. And what that does is it opens up the end years of the 10-year plan as an opportunity to provide some additional projects. And I will talk more about that as we get later into the presentation. So the other item we had a conversation with Gasset about, part of our impacts from COVID is we have seen an impact to our revenue, COVID impacts. So that is to turnpikes, to the Betterment and SB 367 revenue. If you're not familiar, Betterment and SB 367, right now, Betterment has and continues to be the primary opportunity for some of the district projects to take place, paving and other maintenance type activities. SB 367 is the Senate bill that involves acceleration of municipal projects. And then in 2025, we transition from those projects and trying to move those up in the program to paying down the debt service we have incurred for the expansion projects. So right now, again, we've seen a reduction in traffic during the height of the pandemic when everyone was safer. About 5 to 7% reduction in turnpike traffic volumes. And that has had an impact again on our turnpike revenues and on the gas tax side of things. So for Betterment, as I mentioned, we've seen a reduction in our paving programs and state aid bridge program. And on the turnpike side, we're seeing changes to our revenue model, which is causing some delays to some of the large projects. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So on the state side, that translates to an impact on our operations and maintenance program. And we have used some of the CRISA funds. And no, I can't tell you what every letter in the CRISA acronym stands for, but it's basically COVID relief. And those funds are available to states to provide, to backstop some of the holes that we've seen, and particularly as it relates in the state of New Hampshire to maintenance and operations. The other item we had a conversation with Gasset about because we heard a lot about it through the 21 to 30 10-year plan of transportation, and particularly for the department to do a better job of quantifying how much in active transportation related efforts we are engaged in. And an initial snapshot, we're looking at about 15.1 million a year in project related efforts that further or advance active transportation in the state. And so when we talk about that, we're talking about projects that have complete streets components, any multi-use paths we may be constructing either as standalone projects or as part of larger efforts, and other associated type work like pedestrian bike infrastructure and expanded shoulders. We talked about airports. Just in the 21 to 30 plan, the airport funding is about 289 million, which is 29 a year. And then you'll note in red, what we were trying to explain here is that these funds are specifically for the purposes of supporting airports, and we cannot transfer those dollars to use for other highway or those types of projects. We also cover transit funding. Again, this is high level, but we're funding in the 21 to 30 10-year plan about 31.2 million a year for a total of 312 million in the 10-year plan. Primarily, these are FTA funds, and trying to explain that these funds are restricted. We can only use them for these purposes that are identified here: capital, operating, and planning. And just another note is that our transit funding in the 21 to 30 plan does include the New Hampshire Capital Corridor project, which came about as a result of Senate Bill 241. That is in the 21 to 30 10-year plan, but since the last year of the project is 2022, you will not see it in the 23 to 32 draft. We expect that it will be complete at that point, or the work that's been authorized to date has been completed. And then we have rail funding. It's about a little over $1 million a year for a little over $10 million for the total 10-year plan. That's money that comes mostly from our lease agreements with operators on the state-owned rail lines. And again, these funds are restricted. We can't transfer that 10 million and change to any other projects. They are dedicated rail funds. Another item that we shared with the executive council is, we are talking about an increase in federal aid in the legislation that's being considered at the federal level right now. We have the betterment programs, but the betterment programs or the state funds are not enough to address all of the roadway related paving and other maintenance needs that we have on the state system. And so what we're showing in this slide is that we have a significant number of non-federal aid, non-eligible roads. So that means we can't use any of the additional federal dollars. And in 2025, we are looking to transition, the last year of our TIFIA pledged, which is part of the SB 367 efforts, to end. That'll be the last year of those funds. So starting in 2026, we are looking at limited state funds to address some of these other roads that are not federal aid eligible. So that is an issue that we're going to be wrestling with in this next 10-year plan. Another item that's generally of interest to everyone, bridge program. That is the program that we use state funds and provide them to towns to help to maintain, upgrade, and replace aging bridge inventory around the state. It's about $8.5 million per year. It is a 20% match program. So the municipalities that are involved in the program are paying 20% costs. And right now internet connection's unstable. Is that normal?
I don't know if it's normal, but it's not the first time it's happened.
All
right.
You're fairly legible, like most of your audio is coming through.
Hopefully it's the important parts. So right now, we are programming 2025, which means every dollar we have available has been allocated to a project. And we are looking at potentially a decline in revenues about $4 million per year starting in 2032. Right now, we have 113 bridges enrolled in the program through 2029. And 65 of those are on the red list. The average cost for bridges in the program are about 1.4 million. A lot of towns, when we have conversations, will say yes, but we can get contractor XYZ will come in and say we can do the bridge for significantly less. And yes, that may be true, but the reason why you would see maybe a higher level cost for the state aid bridge is we are looking to construct or replace a structure with another one that is going minimum 100-year lifespan. So it's not just a few years to get things by. It's really addressing what the needs are for those individual structures. Are looking at for the 23 to 32 10-year plan, seeing if we can leverage what's referred to in the 10-year plan as Mo Bridge. It's the Municipal Off-System Bridge Rehabilitation Replacement Program. That is a federal source of funds intended to address bridges that do not sit on the federal aid system. We're looking at potentially 3.2 million a year, but stay tuned for the outcome of that. There is a distinction difference in the federal and state definition of what is considered to be a bridge and what is not. It has to do with lengths of the structure. And we're hoping to conduct another solicitation to add new projects in the next 10-year plan update. So we're looking again to add those projects after 2020. And we do provide an annual report to Gasset on how many bridges are in the program, the status, and what the anticipated construction looks like. Any questions so far? So the next item is TAP. I know that program needs no introduction here at the TAC. Our 21 grant round is looking to award about $13.5 million in projects with 20% match. As you probably remember, we cap our federal participation in individual projects at 1.25 million per project. That doesn't mean the project is limited to 1.25. That just means in order to stretch the limited federal dollars that we have in the program, we cap federal participation, and that allows for municipalities to increase their contribution if there are larger projects. We received 34 applications in this last round, and that was requesting 25.1 million total. So significantly more demand than available resources. We are following up our evaluation of those projects, and we will be presenting the list of proposed projects as approved by our commissioner to GASSET as part of the 10-year draft. So stay tuned for details. Is there a question? No. So part of our conversation with GASSET last month was, what are we going for a draft? And we presented our thoughts. We are assuming additional funds, and we're using that Senate, what was then the estimated Senate, looking at about 22% more in additional funds. And so, again, looking at 230 million on average from 23 to 26, and then a little bit more in the outer years. As I mentioned before, we are going to look to fully fund and accelerate existing 10-year plan projects and move those up. And then where that creates space in the outer years, we would be looking for additional safety and capacity projects. The thing that we're looking to do is we have some Garvey bonded projects. Garvey bonds are where the feds allow us to borrow against future federal allocations in order to pay for more projects now. We had looked at a 23 bond issue for about $70 million for some large projects. Seabrook Hampton is the bridge between Seabrook and Hampton, as an extensive project. And then the Sutton I-89 projects, which are looking to better align the existing interstate with safety standards. We also had a 26 issue where we were looking at about 95 million in bonded projects, and there are some other big projects, Bow Concord and Loudon Canterbury, either phase 2 and phase 3 or just phase 3 of the New Hampshire 106 expansion effort. So what we're going to be proposing in the draft plan is that we not go through an issuance of those bonds. While it does allow us to complete projects sooner, it is at the expense of future federal funds. So to the extent that we can, we'd like to avoid that. It's a good tool, especially in a state where we don't have a lot of state money to utilize. We are very dependent on the federal funds that we receive. And so to maximize the amount that we have available to use when we receive it is good for us. And since we are looking at additional federal funds, an opportunity to put those dollars to use and safeguard future projects, future years, future needs. So I mentioned earlier that we are looking at reduced turnpike revenues, and as a result, we are having to look at the schedules for some of the projects that are in the current 10-year plan. Particular of interest for you folks is going to be exit 6 and 7. We are looking to delay the project start by about 3 years. And then the other big turnpike funded project that's going to see a delay is Bow Concord. That is a big project. A portion of it is on the turnpike and a portion is actually federal aid because it's not part of the turnpike system. So we're wrestling with that kind of a monster project on 2 fronts as far as revenues. The other change that folks will see is that we have extended all of our programmatics by an additional 2 years. We generally do that with every 10-year plan. A difference this year is that we are inflating the amount of the programs for those programs that the department controls over those 10 years. And I already mentioned that we are looking to utilize some of our federal bridge funds that the revenue reductions we're anticipating as a result of transitioning from SB 67 being available for municipal projects to SB 367 shifting to paying off the debt we've incurred for the 93 expansion. Which brings us to the next GASSET meeting. Currently, we are looking at Wednesday, September 1st. We have not confirmed a time and location yet, so stay tuned for those details. Yes, Sylvia,
Go back.
I sure can.
I'm just wondering, the delay of the capital projects for the turnpike. If those additional funds that you are hoping on, will that go away?
It will not, and the reason why it won't is our turnpike system is self-financed. We use the turnpike revenues to maintain and expand on the turnpike system. They are federal aid eligible, but we also use the credits that we accrue for maintaining the system as we do now. Every dollar that we spend to maintain that system, because it is federal aid eligible, the feds allow us to utilize the credits for that to match the funds that we spend in the future. So every time you hear turnpike toll credits, that's what we're referring to. It's basically a bank account of money that we've already spent that allows us to not have to come up with additional money to match the federal dollars that we do want to spend.
And this delay then, that makes all total sense now. This delay is again due to the reduction in people driving and using the turnpike. Okay, thank you.
So the agenda that we're looking at for our September 1st meeting is to present some of the outcomes that we're looking at in the draft 10-year plan. We're not presenting the draft 10-year plan, sharing more of where we're at in terms of the development. And then really to talk through a lot of the logistics, the content for the fall hearing, and talk about, we used an online virtual parliament poll last time out. We heard some feedback response to that. We're looking to retool that poll a bit in response to the comments. And we do want to receive some feedback from Gasset before we look at rolling that out next time. The other item that I'm sure you folks are wrestling with here, maybe not to the extent that we will, but you know, we're usually 20 plus presentations and hearings around the state. We hold hearings at the pleasure of each of the 5 counselors in their district in order to facilitate feedback for each of those counselors from their constituents. Because of the change in the emergency order and how we conduct these, hybrid meetings may be an issue for us in some of the areas. Some counselors may want to do more hybrid and less in person, and others may want to do more in person and less hybrid. So this is really going to be an opportunity for us to sit and chat with the counselors and get a better what they would like to see in each of their respective districts. We are already working on scheduling dates and working with the counselors, but we don't have a schedule that we're yet, but stay tuned. There'll be plenty.
William, another question on that. I know the first Gasset meeting, there were serious IT issues. There were a lot of sound. So the whole thing was tricky, I would say. So even you can see we're in Manchester and we're having internet connection issues. We know that we've invested a little bit so that people can see us. We have the microphones. How will you deal with those issues around the state on ensuring that people who are zooming in can hear and see properly?
Yeah, we are. That is an extensive and ongoing conversation. We're looking at different tech. I don't think anybody was a fan of what we used at the first Gasset hearing in August. It was very difficult to hear any of the speakers that weren't. So basically anybody other than Pete or someone that was standing in front of the microphone, you could see but couldn't hear, and you couldn't hear the counselors at all. So we're aware of that. Looking at other tech and other options for how do we deal and just to administer the meeting on a remote basis. So hopefully you'll see a new and improved 2.0 approach to this up to the fall. But yeah, you're not speaking out of turn. Actually, I was in Concord, but watching remotely just to see how it played out, and not so good. That's one of the things, as I said, we're all dealing with that.
Yeah. I appreciate it.
Other questions? Hey.
There was a slide that had been given to the Gasset, and I don't remember the particular details of it, but you probably do. And I ask this question just because of inquiries about communities that want to put forward corridors for the corridor study program. I just got another inquiry yesterday from the town of Hooksett. They're very interested in proposing a Route 3A corridor study in that program. What's the current timeline for the corridor study program, and when can communities expect an opportunity to put a corridor in for consideration?
Yeah, so the short answer, which is honest, but maybe not one that everybody's gonna like, that we're going to be expanding the detail that we discussed the program as part of the 23 to 32 process. We have a list of candidates that have passed 2 rounds. I expect there to be movement on that as part of this team. I think you've had some direct conversations with Bill Watson in my office.
Yeah, but it's been kind of more of like we're, so we're on it sort of thing. But I remember there was a slide, I think, and I can't remember the details of it, that was given to Gassett that maybe had a fall timeline. But yeah, I'm just wondering if there was anything new on that. Doesn't sound like there was.
Yeah, my understanding of where things are, and again, a lot of this is changing probably even as I speak, but we are hoping to have, because we've already got one project in the program, right? Bedford.
Yep.
We are hoping to have a conversation about the way we select candidates for the program as part of this Gassett process, which is why I was saying stay tuned. As we get to that initial, here's the 10-year plan, I expect a lot of those details to have been as part of that conversation.
Yeah. Well, just have your benefit that, I mean, we do have communities that want to submit corridors for consideration of the program. I'm looking forward to that opportunity. So,
Great. It's a lot better than spending nothing to spend it on.
it's true.
Other questions? Yes.
No, just in advance for the lack of understanding. But we just received the latest census data. It is the population, decrease in population for the exact effect.
As far as an increase to what we see in terms of apportionment,
It's going like so far.
no. What we've used for our projection purposes are the documents that have been released by legislative staff and by AASHTO as far as anticipated apportionments. And then we get to, there's generally a difference between what Congress apportions us, so the total amount of money they provide us, and then what Federal Highways provides us in terms of an obligation or limitation. So if Congress says, here's how much we're releasing, Federal Highway says, well, we've only got this much to spend. And so each state, this is your obligational limitation, which generally is a lower value. I think right now, our apportionment for the state of New Hampshire is around 183 million in federal formula funds. Our obligational limitation is about 158 million. So we have two numbers to work with, and unless or until I guess we see something different from the legislature at the federal level, our values will be based on what we see in those apportionment tables.
My second question is, you're not how big of this a couple of years ago, but it seems like it's a regular.
Eric Zimmerman from the National Association of Regional Councils.
So, yeah. And remember years ago, he said that there was a inequality between apportionment for Vermont and New Hampshire, and that was going to get rectified. At some point, it was hoped.
It won't be rectified. Vermont is going to get the same amount more money that New Hampshire gets. So we, as William said, I mean, $180, $185 million a year in New Hampshire. Vermont for comparison, is about $220 to $225 million per year on average. And, you know, it's always a question of, well, how is that fair, given Vermont's got less population and fewer federal aid eligible lane miles? It goes back to a formula that dates back to a decade ago, and a lot of obligations of happened, and kind of that obligation being the basis of a formula that's now carried forward for a decade. There wasn't a lot of appetite, I guess, to you know, adjust those formulas. It certainly has been something that Congressman Pappas and others have forward. And my understanding is that the basis of the formula is largely going to be the same. All boats will be floated in as much as the 22% that William was referencing in the Senate bill will likely be applied across the board to all of the states, more or less under the existing formula. So Vermont will continue to get more money than New Hampshire does, but New Hampshire will still get more money. So it's a win-win, but you know, that formula, there are some states that don't do as well under that formula, and a lot of states that do quite well, and there just wasn't appetite to reinvent that wheel at a national level.
I have just wondered back at the time, stated that, said like, you know, census.
Opportunity would have been in crafting this particular bill, and I know that Congressman Pappas carried those discussions forward, and it just wasn't the political reinvent that formula as part of this legislation. Yeah, and, you know, frankly, you know, our gripe is probably not as big as Texas's is. Texas gets the short end of the stick in a big way, but the states that are aggrieved by the formula are far outnumbered by the states that benefit from the formula.
Now, and again, one of the things that doesn't get a lot of attention, and this New Hampshire does very well at, is despite the fact that every state gets this apportionment and they have the ability to spend it, not every state can spend all the money that they get. And so every year, right around this time, we go through a process that actually started back in the late winter, early spring, called redistribution. So each of the federal highway divisions identifies, with the cooperation with their state Department of Transportation, how much of that allocation are they not going to be able to spend? Are they not going to be able to, in the federal highways parlance, obligate before the end of the federal fiscal year? Once those amounts are identified, part of that request is also, and if you can't use it all, how much of additional funding could you use? And we tend to excel here in New Hampshire at the ability to, because we don't get enough money at the federal level to really pay for everything we need to do, we're really good at getting projects ready to go so that when we do have the money, we can put a project out to bid in a way very quickly. And so we tend to do very well every year on gaining funds through that redistribution process. Yes. Other questions?
So the list of TAP projects for this round is expected to be finalized by September 1st. Is that our commissioner's recommendation?
I don't know that we'll present it at the September 1st meeting, but when the 10-year plan comes out, it will include those projects that we are putting forward. And I would expect that as part of that conversation, we would let Gasset know specifically these projects showing in the 10-year plan are the new TAP projects that we selected from the round. And we'll share that list with the RPCs as well. So if you aren't able to catch any of the 20 some odd Gasset hearings that we hold around the state, certainly Nate and others here in the office will have a good handle on which projects were selected.
There may have been a question or two or raised hands.
Oh,
Now in
I'll let you handle the raised hands.
I'm not. Are there questions virtually?
Yeah, this is James Veo. I just two quick questions. Has there been a record of decision from Federal Highway on exit 6 and 7 project?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, and the other is, and I probably should know this, but for park and ride facilities managed and improved by New Hampshire DOT, are those typically paid for or funded primarily through transit programming sources or through other sources?
It's a little bit of both. Generally, when we are involved in those park and ride plots, I believe we are using CMAQ funds, either directly as part of the CMAQ program or funds that we've transferred to FTA for that purpose. And there are other projects that have involved specific federal highway dollars where we may have either constructed or approved an existing facility as part of mitigation activity on that related to that project. So it's a mix.
Great, thanks.
Are there any other questions from our virtual participants? Hearing none. Thank you, William. That was great. Very informative.
So we're gonna go, I guess, next to the overview of statewide mobility management initiative. So,
Carl, sorry about this. This went a little longer, so we're gonna save you to last and have Steve go next. And Steve, I'm just making you a co-host so you can share your screen.
Thank you.
Thanks for being flexible. Sorry about that, Carl, but we're all on the edge of our seats about freight, as you can possibly imagine, but we will have our guest speaker go first.
Just a second to get my slides up. Right. All right, if somebody could confirm for me verbally, because I can't see you right now, that you can see my slides.
We see your slides, but it's not in presentation mode. It's in like, as if you want to work on them.
Well, that's interesting because on my computer, it's in presentation mode. Let me try to share.
Try again. And then I will mute us once you start.
Any better?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, great. So again, everyone, my name is Steve Workman and I'm the Director of Transport New Hampshire. So we're a statewide advocacy and support organization. We tend to work in the spaces in between, and I have a diagram that will speak to that a little more. I also serve on the State Coordinating Council for Community Transportation, and I am an officer for the New Hampshire Transit Association. For the Mobility Manager Project, I've actually been a lead facilitator, really leading a 2-year process that started with funding decisions, and then actually over the past year focused in on the buildup of what we're now calling the New Hampshire Statewide Mobility Management Network. So this is a pretty exciting project. It has involved a huge amount of people statewide. We've had members of every region have been working to develop this project. We've had both federal and state agencies supporting it. So my intention right now is to take you through a series of slides that give you sort of a high level overview, including the funding, which is often what folks are curious about. Then at the end of that, if you want more specific questions, we can do a drill down. Meanwhile, I want to ask that somebody in the room, Sylvia, I don't know whether it's you, but you be ready with your gong and your hook so that if I get too long-winded here, you let me know to speed it up. So with that said, I want to talk about some of the key people. So the build out of the Mobility Manager Project is really under the SCC, the State Coordinating Council for Community Transportation. And so, as I said, I'm acting as the lead facilitator, pulling that process together. And then since this project went forward, we ended up with a grant opportunity I'm going to talk about through federal CDC, and it's come through our State Bureau of Public Health and Systems. So Elisa Druzba, who is a member of the SCC, saw our emerging blueprint and this network idea, and she saw an opportunity to secure some funding to help build this out in ways that wouldn't be able to. So that's essentially the structure. So let me tell you about the blueprint itself. Some of you may have seen this. The blueprint is a living document, and basically it's doing a couple of things. It's acting as a historical record that talks about our process and the decisions we've made along the way. And when I say we, I mean SCC level, New Hampshire Transit Association, DOT, and other partners in this, like Elisa and her grant. So at the end of this, it will capture what we've done to get here, but then it actually lays out a plan for what this network is supposed to accomplish. And we'll talk about the structure of it shortly, and it will make more sense to you. So in that effect, it's going to be a guide that carries us forward, at least through what we're viewing as a 2-year startup pilot period. Let's see. Now, if my computer will respond and advance the slide, I'll be happy. There we go. So I want to back up to just make sure we're on the same page about mobility management, because I think a lot of people says, what is this? Is this the latest buzzword in community transportation? So there's really 5 principles or guiding philosophies that we have borrowed from the National Center for Mobility Management, who is funded by FTA, and really is taking the lead on developing mobility management nationwide. So the first thing is mobility management is a transportation strategy that prioritizes customer needs and the meeting of these needs through the coordinated use of a variety of providers. I want to clarify that when I say providers, yes, it means different transit agencies, but it actually means in its fullest form, all modes of transportation. The idea is if you need to connect someone from their home to where they need to be, what modes can you put together to get them there? That could be bike ped, that could be microtransit, that could be on demand, that could be fixed route bus service, any and all of those. That could even extend down to things like taxis. Next, mobility management is an evolving concept. So it aims to improve specialized transportation, particularly for veterans, older adults, people with disabilities, and individuals with lower incomes. So in our transportation funding world, think 5310 funding. Mobility management looks beyond a single transportation service or solution to a family of services. The philosophy that can offer a wide range of services and options to meet an equally wide array of community demographics and needs. Mobility management begins with a community vision in which the entire transportation network, including public transit, private operators, cycling, walking, volunteers, drivers, work together with customers, planners, stakeholders to deliver coordinated transportation options that best meet a community's need. So simply put, nothing about us without us. And then last, mobility management requires a customized approach, meaning no 2 programs are exactly alike, even though they share a core philosophy, desired outcomes, and require partnerships across the spectrum. So let's talk about how that last one impacts this blueprint. We recognize that if this project and this statewide network is going to work, we had to put some parameters in place. So we have to have some shared goals and outcomes and structures to make this effective. Having said all of that, this is also empowering each of the transportation regions to adapt to their specific needs. We know that none of our regions are identical. We know that there is a rural-urban split, and we know within regions that rural-urban split often rears its head. We also know there's a lot of gaps in services. So it's really important that we allow that customization and flexibility to happen within the larger context of the goals and outcomes we hope to achieve. So this visual has proved helpful, and I think it's important because I think we need to acknowledge that really mobility management is all about relationship building. So when I look at this, why are we bothering with this? Why does this even matter? So if you see the first diagram, you see a big box with arrows going in every direction, and then inside that you see smaller black arrows. So I want you to think this is without mobility management strategies and coordination. So providers and modes lack coordination or shared purpose, and you can see that they're going in all different directions. None of this is a reflection on their intent. We know that everybody that we're working with wants to do the best by their customers and to serve the communities we represent. However, without that work, so you may remember I talked about my role at Transport New Hampshire. I work in the space between. So think of me as wandering around the black arrows inside the bigger boxes. And so I'm just trying to help find ways that I can bring folks together, and I have the ability to focus on things a little differently or at a big picture level, whereas a lot of agency folks, they need to keep the buses rolling, so to speak. So when you actually get effective mobility management, you end up seeing the next picture, which is the larger box has now become a single arrow going in one direction. And you notice within that, the smaller black arrows, or those providers, are also aligned and going in the same direction. The reason I think this is powerful is, let's face it, New Hampshire is an independent state. We are not asking agencies to give up their identity. We're not asking them to merge in ways that feels like we've taken their program away. Volunteer driver programs, we know there are very small niche programs. We're not asking them to change. What we're asking them to do is align themselves with us so that we're all moving in the same direction. And that's what we hope to achieve as we implement this. And of course, the reminder here is we have a happy customer who is getting where they need to go. I've spoke about regions. I suspect this committee is aware at least of their own region, but as you can see on the map here, this is how we've divided the state for community transportation regions. And so the mobility manager network is going to build out in each of those regions. So we have been developing a vision and a mission. So our vision for the overall network is New Hampshire envisions an integrated system of safe, reliable, and sustainable transportation options that allow residents to maintain independence and participate in community life, no matter their age or ability. And the last, and then our mission is the mission of the New Hampshire Mobility Management Network is to improve the coordination, capacity, quality, and financial sustainability of all forms of mobility services. So I want to point out one thing. A vision by its definition is pie in the sky. It's where you want to be at the end of the day when this work is implemented. And ultimately, it's the goal you hope to achieve to put yourself out of business because you've addressed the need. So it is supposed to inspire us to reach far beyond where we are at right now. However, the mission, of course, is focused on the actual work. And you can see that coordination is really key to this. We need to pull providers, funders, policymakers, everyone together to make adjustments and share resources so that we can be more effective. So here's the actual structure of the mobility management network. So you have a sense of how this operates. So in the center, you have the state coordinating council. Then you have the state agencies. So I've pulled out NHDOT for a second, but I'm going to go over and talk about the other state agencies first. So at the SCC, which is statutorily created and given a charge, is supposed to be working on coordination of transportation issues across all levels of state government. So there are actually a number that are quite specific. So the first one is the Division of Veterans Services, and the SCC has had members that represent, and we're continuing to work on that. The Department of Education is supposed to be represented. Right now, that's an area that we have to develop more and rebuild those relationships. Then at the bottom, this is sort of a catch-all box because there's two entities in particular that are central to this work. And so that's the Governor's Commission on Disability, and then the Committee on Aging, which is Rebecca Skye's organization, if you're familiar with her. And then our most important player, I think, is really DHHS. And I've added public health because that shows the intersection of this CDC grant that we have. But part of what we're concerned about is there's obviously the Medicaid, Medicare brokerage systems that purchase services, but we're really doing a lot of work with populations within DHS, so like TANF populations, where we're trying to help their counselors connect their clients to transportation services that will allow them economic stability to get to jobs, to get to doctors, to get to childcare, whatever is needed in their world. So we're trying to increase that relationship and find ways to make that more effective. At the SCC level, we then go down to the regional coordinating councils, as you're all familiar with. And then within that, there's of course the lead agencies that hold the contracts. And then finally, that goes to the transportation providers. What this project seeks to do is to develop a statewide mobility manager position. So this is at the top, and this is a contracted position under DOT. Then we were able to build it out and say, we're going to give each region a mobility manager of its own, and they're going to be focused on their region, but they're then going to plug in and work to implement statewide and regional improvements with the statewide mobility manager, the SCC, and the RCCs. So I want to talk about the arrows because I think they're important from a financial and contracting standpoint. So those of you that can see color, the red dashed arrows represent where there is some sort of contractual relationship. So as you can see, the CDC grant is represented on the left side, and you can see that there is a line going to the SCC, who has some of those funds on a contract. And then there is contracts going to the lead agencies that are going to be receiving funds for that. Then they have a contract with their providers. Over on the mobility manager side of things, DOT has the contractual relationship with whomever they hire for the statewide mobility manager. And then the regional mobility managers, the lead agencies are technically the contracting. So they're tracking, they're providing that high level of supervision. But really, it's the regional coordinating councils that are setting the agenda and working closely with the regional mobility manager. Why does that distinction matter? I think it's important that a lead agency understands that in some aspects, they're acting more as a fiscal type agent for this. So we're not asking them to come in and create a work plan for this regional mobility manager. What we're saying is, no, that's the responsibility of the regional coordinating councils to do that. And then the lead agency through supervision makes sure those things are carried out effectively and tracked. And then lastly, all of this goes down to our customers, because after all, the whole point of doing this is to serve them and put them in the center of this. So the funding piece of it, and this ends up coming in 3 parts. So I want to step back and tell you 2 years ago, as part of the 10-year planning process, the last one, community transportation and transit advocates were able to effectively communicate to GASSET and DOT that we simply don't have enough money for these services. As an acknowledgement to that, DOT said, you know, we have CMAQ funds, which certainly can be used to work on some of these projects, but we also have a fair amount of money that's sitting there because of different project backlogs. We think we can effectively transfer those funds out and do a behind-the-scenes shift among federal fundings, and we can appropriate $2.2 million. So that was actually codified in the last 10-year plan. So for 2 years of that plan, $2.2 million have been available. DOT then went to us and said, us being the New Hampshire Transit Association, and said, okay, you asked for this money. We're interested to hear what your ideas are for how to use it. I think that's pretty significant, by the way. I think DOT, many federal and state agencies, by their very nature, tend to be very hierarchical with that top down. I think this represents a really critical shift at DOT, where they came to us and said, we really want your ideas. And honestly, they have allowed us the time and the process to work through this. And at times, I know they've rolled their eyes and bit their lips around the process and how much time it's taking, but really it's allowed a much more robust process with more buy-in from folks, instead of feeling like this has been imposed upon them. So what NHTA did was it conducted a series of meetings with membership and providers and said, how could we spend this? So what we came up with was a plan to split that money evenly. So that's $550,000 per year into 4 activity areas. So activity areas 1 and 2 were unmet operating needs, one for the urban systems and one for the rural systems. Activity 3 was an attempt to advance tier 1 or 2 projects, so high priority projects that have been identified in the statewide strategic transit assessment. So these are shorthand, we call them expansion projects. So it's new services, specifically or generally bus route services. And then the final one we called community transportation priorities. And what we did was we said, well, we want to set aside $120,000 to hire a full-time statewide mobility manager. And then the balance of that should support community transportation services in some form. So DOT took this, they looked at it, and they essentially accepted it. But when it came to activity 4, they said, you know, we really actually would like to see you build this out and create some regional mobility managers, but you need to figure out how to do that. So that's where this first pot of money comes from. So when you look at this slide with the chart, what we then had to do was we had to make a decision how to equitably split these funds. So this is that activity 4 funds. And in order to do that, the SCC and all its members had to come to a decision. This was not an easy process for folks because it meant that you had to look at the bigger picture and the common good and potentially give up some money that you might otherwise receive at that agency level. But folks came together and did that. And so we based it loosely on an existing formula. And then it resulted in saying, well, look, what we want to achieve right now is at least every region has the ability to hire a part-time manager. And so that's how we split the funds. And you can see the allocation per region with the cap imposed. And so that utilized the balance of funding that we had left after the set aside for the statewide mobility manager. So this is how we worked right up until about May. And that's when the CDC grant came in. And I'll give you more background in a second on that. But the CDC grant allowed us to expand here. And so these funds are 2 years of federal funds from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. The problem with this, and I'll show you a little bit about it, is that it was only going to support transportation initiatives in rural areas. And unfortunately, you all are considered an urban RCC. So you were not qualified to receive these funds. That's unfortunate. Let's leave CDC funding and look at this column, activity 3 transfer. So this is a great shot in the arm for the network to expand, but we did not want to leave these 3 regions that didn't qualify behind. So at the SEC level, we started talking to DOT and we said, look, we got to find these funds. The quickest way for us to do this was to look at activity 3. So those were advancing statewide projects. We received 2 statewide projects that went through the vetting process at the NHT level. We advanced them for consideration to DOT. If DOT funds those projects and they move forward, we still have enough money to reappropriate $180,000 from activity 3 and put it into the network. And this got each of the urban RCCs to a full-time mobility manager. So everyone is receiving $120,000 to support those positions statewide. So this was a major accomplishment. The NHTA supported this change to the recommendations. The SCC ratified it. Now, having said all of that, right now, DOT is considering that it may fund its statewide mobility manager position differently. It is leaning toward hiring a firm to do this, and in particular RLS, who is paid for out of the RTAP funding budget. And there's money in that budget. If they do this, then they can use that budget, which will free up the $120,000 set aside, which means ultimately we only have to borrow $60,000 from activity 3, but that's a minor detail. So I want to talk about the grant. First, I understand I'm telling you about the grant and you're not receiving most of it, but you are going to have an impact from this. So this is actually a federal grant. It's called the COVID Health Disparity Grant. So it was national initiative, and it was basically to address disparities that COVID-19 actually either exacerbated or shone a light on. As part of that, there's a whole bunch of purposes and grant goals that go in there. So as you can see, the purpose is to address COVID-19 related health disparities and advance health equity by expanding state health department capacity and services to prevent and control COVID-19 infection or transmission among populations at higher risk that are underserved, including racial and ethnic minority groups and people living in rural communities. So of course, for us, this fits the definition of 5310, especially because it includes older adults. The targeted outcomes of this overall grant is to reduce the COVID-19 related health disparities, improve and increase testing and contact tracing, and improve state health department capacities and services to prevent control COVID infection or transmission. So how did we get to the transportation thing? Well, because Elisa had been serving on the SCC and was a relatively new role that she's coming up on her 1-year anniversary, she saw this blueprint that had been working and she followed the discussion, and she realized that on the health side, transportation has been identified as one of the leading, if not lead, barrier to health services and other quality of life and health indicators that they follow. And she saw an opportunity because she knew that we could not fund this network fully. So she saw a chance to divert some funding within the parameters of this guideline. So what she did was she put her hand up quickly and said, look, I have a project to use some of New Hampshire's funds. So the goal for the project is to address disparities during the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly to rural populations who had difficulty accessing essential services, testing, and vaccinations. So those populations include people who are unable to drive, including those without access to personal vehicles, et cetera. So that brought $3 million over the next 2 years in to support this mobility manager network. The problem that we had to deal with, and Elisa tried very hard, was we recognized that we were leaving 3 regions out. And this is basically the reason, because this is the definition for the grant that's being used. So you have the rural areas, and we simply can't directly put the money in there. We did try, she tried it at the state level and the federal level. They were sympathetic, but they said at the end of the day, it really had to maintain the spirit, even though the acknowledgement that in your region, you have both urban and rural communities represented. So what is this going to fund? Well, the first thing it does is it funds state level facilitation, support, and data collection for the 5 regional coordinating council mobility managers and their projects. So it will also fund increased awareness of transportation resources, increased accessibility of transportation resources, address issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in transportation, and an evaluation of the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the community transportation. So this is essentially the SCC receiving this contract and a budget or a pot of money to accomplish this work. At the August SCC meeting, the members voted that that contract was going to flow through SCC, and that SCC wanted to hire Transport New Hampshire and myself specifically to carry out this work, because the SCC does not have paid staff. It's volunteer folks that come together to make it work. The CDC was also saying we absolutely need a position like this, because we have Elisa acting as the grant administrator, but she can't do this alone, nor does she have the knowledge and the connection that needs to happen. So again, here I was positioned to work in between the spaces on behalf of all of you. So right now we're finalizing budget figures, and we'll be bringing those back to the SCC because members were concerned that they didn't have those details yet at the August meeting. And I want to say that this network, we are literally building it, and this grant in particular, we are building it as we fly the airplane, so to speak. The second thing it funds is the 5 rural regional coordinating council mobility manager positions. And then it gives a pot of funding for mobility management related projects to each of those regions. This is unfortunate because we do not have a way to find funding like this to give to you and the other 2 regions that could not receive project funding. However, there is a backdoor to this. And that is through the contract that I will be working on through SCC. Means even though this is rural focused, we know that there are things that we can improve that have statewide positive impact. So some of the project related funds that I will have coming into this contract are going to allow me to work on statewide issues, which will include all of you. So yes, it's unfortunate that you don't have a pot of money to make decisions about that you can use that the other 5 regions do, but you are going to be getting some benefit, and you will be working closely with myself, hopefully a statewide mobility manager and the regional mobility managers to do some of this work as we go. So I'm going to talk about the timeline of where we're at for this. So here we are in August. We are continuing the review and the development of the blueprint. There are lots of subcommittees and work groups that are occurring to get this in order. In September, we are hoping that the SCC membership adopts the blueprint at the September 2nd meeting. No one can move forward hiring their mobility managers until DOT has accepted this blueprint and given the green light to move forward. The second piece is the funding. And because we have 2 pots that are relevant, most of you are aware that you received an initial amount of money, so that from that activity 4 funding, you received that in your renewed 5310 contracts. That is only half of that money. For your region, the additional money that we borrowed from activity 3, that transfer has not been fully approved yet and gone through the system. So that's not reflected in your contract. That will come forward as an amendment once they figure out exactly where it's coming from. But meanwhile, the overarching issue is, even though this money exists in your contract as of July 1st, Federal Highway, Federal Transit are still doing final approvals of the transfer. There is no problem anticipated with this. It is simply a matter of process and moving forward, and that should happen probably by the end of the month. So in other words, even if we were all ready, we could not go out the door and hire yet. The CDC grant funds are a different story, and I know this doesn't matter as much to you, but those funds, there's an approval process for sole source, so it's not being held up in any contracting. The funding is going through the GNC process and the contracts, and by the time that is done, it looks like end of September, beginning of October, those funds will now be in place and begin to flow. So what this means in September is, once we approve this, we're also simultaneously working on RFPs or contract work, depending on how each region wants to hire, because you may do it as a contract position, or a lead agency may choose to have an employee. And then finally, once we get the green light, then people can begin advertising or the RFP process. And then we're going to begin the hiring and onboarding process. I think it's more realistic that that really starts to happen in October and beyond, as you can see there. So the CDC grants are tied to 2 years of funding. We already have approval to push some of that funding. They are very aware of our process and support it. So the fact we are not losing anything by these delays that I just sort of gave you an overview about. And those are the main issues that I wanted to talk about. I realize I haven't given you any specifics in terms of, well, what exactly are the role of the mobility managers and what are they going to be doing? That is included in the blueprint, but I want to be respectful of time. So I'd like to open it up for any questions, and that can include wanting to talk about some of those specific pieces.
We're unmuted, yeah.
So is the program only a program for 2 years and then it expires, or where does the money come from after 2 years?
Okay, so I think I heard most of that. So this is the sustainability piece. So getting back to the blueprint has issues that have been decided. So roles, performance measures are being developed, and those are articulated in the plan. The plan also identifies areas that will not be complete by then. And so sustainability is one of those areas where the plan speaks to the need to do this. It's also going to talk about some emerging tools. There's something really unique happening right now. New Hampshire is in the spotlight for this project because it represents a working across our state agencies and a work across federal agencies. So the FTA is incredibly excited about this project. Federal CDC is incredibly excited about this project, and DHHS in general is incredibly excited about it. So in a very real sense, all eyes are on New Hampshire right now. I also do some work with Judy Shanley with the National Center for Mobility Management. They are a constant support to us and have helped us in this development process. But some of the work that I'm doing for them is actually on developing performance measures nationally for mobility manager networks. And then also a sustainability piece that I'm working with Federal Highway on some of their frameworks for sustainability, FTA as well, and we're hoping to develop a tool. This might actually, New Hampshire then may be a pilot project for some of these tools that will focus on sustainability issues. So when we talk sustainability, there's more to it than just finances. Obviously the money is important, but the health of the network, the effective partnerships, those are all part of what we're going to review for sustainability. Specifically to your question about funding right now, the 10-year plan, so that's that $2.2 million, which we divided out, and ultimately 550,000 went to support the mobility manager network. So as we know, the 10-year plan, that $2.2 million is in that plan for all 10 years. But because of the way we do this plan, we recognize that it gets evaluated and reapproved every 2 years. So theoretically, this could be stripped out of the plan. DOT has no plans to do that. They see the value in what we're developing, and they're anxious to get this implemented so we can start seeing what the return on investment is. So that portion of funding is relatively stable. The CDC grant, however, like many of the COVID-related type funding, that is limited. So this was a very specific grant program that got launched, and it was very odd, by the way. New Hampshire received its funding and then was told, go ahead, reverse engineer this and tell us what you're going to do with it. So it was a formula split. New Hampshire got the money. So we know that program will not extend beyond 2 years, that specific type of funding. But what is being talked about now that we're building these cross-sector relationships is that if we can demonstrate value here and movement on the goals for folks in the health arena, if you will, then we're talking about future opportunities for them to continue to braid funding with us so that we can support these networks. So I cannot give you a confirmation. I can only tell you that all players from DOT to DHHS to SCC and providers, we are moving forward with, we have 2 years to build this out, to prove and to make the case for why we need to continue to support this.
On the Zoom call, any questions? Seeing none, thank you, Steve, very much for that presentation.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks so much, Steve, and for coming in late in the game. I know that was a late request on our part, but thanks so much. And thanks, Carl and Zach, for being patient, and we'll put you for the next TAC meeting in September.
All right, with that is, do we have any other business? Anyone have any announcements?
Any requests from TAC members in the room or online that you would like us on in future meetings that would be of interest? Always like to ask that question just in case you have a subject you want us to dive into. Seeing we'll keep being creative.
Sorry. I can't think of anything.
I've got an idea. You got some time to work on this, but before the next round of TAP, maybe it's a instructional how to write a good TAP application. So that we actually get the materials that we need to see to evaluate quality of the application.
That's a great idea. I don't know if everybody, did you hear that, Cam and James? Everybody heard that virtually? Yep, I'm seeing nods. Thank you. So how to write a good application. That's a great idea. Thank you.
Well, if there's nothing else, I'll motion to adjourn.
Second.
Nancy, second.
All right, thumbs up across the board and those online and everybody, including virtually, please come grab a bagel.
Sylvia, you were very good.
Okay.